Before we begin tonight's story, let me ask you something simple but important. What time is it where you're watching from? Drop it down in the comments, because I love seeing how this journey stretches across time zones, across nights, across mornings that feel like nights. Now, dim the lights, let the room settle, and lean into the story. Let's start with the chapter 1, The Dog on a Chain. Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo was never meant to be a headline, and maybe that's what made him so dangerous. In the underworld, the loud ones usually burn out fast. The men with the Cadillac smiles and the tabloid-ready suits, the John Goddess of the world who lived for the flashbulb. Scarfo was the opposite. He was quiet, almost forgettable at a glance. But that forgettability was his camouflage, his cloak. Born in 1929 in Brooklyn, raised in the dense immigrant neighborhoods of South Philadelphia, Scarfo grew up in a world where trust was scarce and humiliation was permanent. Small, wiry, prone to sudden bursts of temper, he never commanded respect through size or charisma, only through a kind of relentless, simmering rage that clung to him like a second skin. Teachers said he was too moody, too sensitive, too quick to file away slights, and that trait would become the engine of his entire criminal philosophy. Scarfo didn't let things go. He let them grow. Every insult, every laugh at his size, every eye roll from a neighborhood punk became a tally in his invisible ledger. Years later, men would die because of jokes told in schoolyards. Scarfo remembered everything. That was his curse and his power. And before we keep going deeper into his story, let me ask you, from where are you watching tonight, and what time is it where you are? I read every single one of your comments, and I'd love to know what made Scarfo different. Wasn't just his violence. Plenty of mobsters were violent. It was the precision of it. He didn't swing wild. He stabbed with intent. He understood something most gangsters never did. That fear had to be cultivated, not just imposed. When Angelo Bruno, the gentle Don, ran the Philadelphia mob, he tolerated Scarfo like a dangerous tool kept at arm's length. Bruno was measured, diplomatic, a man who believed peace meant profit. Scarfo was the opposite. To him, peace looked like weakness. When Bruno effectively banished Scarfo to Atlantic City in the late 1960s, most men would have seen it as an insult, a dead-end posting. Back then, Atlantic City was a ghost town, boarded-up hotels, decaying boardwalks, the scent of salt and rot hanging over empty casinos that hadn't even been legalized yet. But Scarfo saw something no one else did. A future. He haunted the bars and union halls, listened to the whispers of city councilmen and construction bosses, memorized the rhythms of a dying city on the edge of rebirth. And when New Jersey legalized casino gambling in 1976, Scarfo was already there, waiting like a spider in the corner of a room nobody bothered to sweep. Within months, every load of concrete, every iron girder, every union card had a shadow trailing it. Scarfo's shadow. He didn't seize power in a single move. He let the city come to him, contract by contract, payoff by payoff, until Atlantic City's renaissance was built, not just on neon and roulette wheels, but on the invisible fear of a man barely 5'5", who smiled only when the math worked out in his favor. By the time Bruno was assassinated in 1980, Scarfo was ready. The Philadelphia crime family, fractured overnight, factions killing each other in alleys and parking lots. But Scarfo stayed calm. He let others bleed, let others make noise, and then, quietly, he stepped forward. He had the advantage no one else had. Atlantic City, a gold mine in the making, a city that couldn't move a brick without his approval. The FBI would later say that under Scarfo, the Philadelphia mob pulled in over $30 million a year. Much of it skimmed from casinos, construction, and unions. But Scarfo's real wealth wasn't money. It was terror. He built a culture where men didn't just obey him. They performed their loyalty like actors on a stage, terrified that a wrong glance or too long laugh would land them in the trunk of a car. Even his allies weren't safe. In 1981, Vincent Falcone, a close associate, cracked one too many complaints about Scarfo's leadership. Scarfo invited him over, poured champagne, smiled, and then shot him in the head mid-toast. His nephew, Phil Leonetti, later said Scarfo was angrier about the carpet stains than the betrayal. That was Scarfo's world. Murder as punctuation, paranoia as religion. He didn't just kill men. He curated their deaths like lessons, reminders etched into the bloodstream of the organization. And Philadelphia learned quickly. The gentle dawn was gone. Now came Little Nicky, the tyrant in pastel suits, the man who taught an entire city that silence wasn't golden. Silence was survival. Chapter 2. The Reign of Paranoia. Scarfo's Philadelphia was a city of whispers. The neon lights of Atlantic City glowed brighter than ever, but behind them stretched a network of shadows tighter than piano wire. Scarfo ruled like a dictator in miniature, short in stature, volcanic in temper, unpredictable in a way that made even loyal soldiers flinch when he raised an eyebrow. Between 1980 and 1989, more than 30 mob-connected murders were linked to his orders. That wasn't just bloody, it was historic. Bruno's era had been defined by diplomacy. Scarfo's was defined by bodies in trunks, captains shot in broad daylight, associates who vanished without explanation. He didn't believe in second chances. To him, mercy was just deferred weakness. Even Frank Monte, one of his trusted captains, was executed in 1982 after Scarfo began suspecting disloyalty. No trial, no warning, just bullets and silence. Scarfo ruled by subtraction. Every question mark in his mind became a funeral. But it wasn't just the violence. It was the paranoia. Scarfo's reign turned his crew into a hall of mirrors. No one knew who was reporting to whom, because Scarfo made sure everyone was watching everyone else. He installed his own version of counterintelligence within the mob, assigning lieutenants to spy on captains, soldiers to report on lieutenants, and even his own nephew, Leonetti, was never given the full picture of operations. Scarfo believed that loyalty without verification wasn't loyalty at all. It was hope, and hope, he said, was for gamblers. He didn't gamble, he calculated. Every meeting was in a noisy diner. Every drink came sealed. Every seat faced the door. He even brought his own knife to restaurants, refusing to use the ones provided. Associates joked, nervously, that Scarfo would send back a bottle of wine if the cork looked tired. And yet, beneath the paranoia was genius. He controlled labor unions so completely that entire construction projects stalled or sped up depending on his mood. If you wanted a permit approved, you didn't go to City Hall, you went to Scarfo. Sometimes you paid in envelopes, sometimes in no-show jobs, sometimes in silence. Scarfo had built a city-sized machine where every gear, from casino bosses to janitors, turned only when he nodded. And yet, paranoia eats its own. Scarfo's brutality alienated allies, terrified subordinates, and attracted the full fury of the FBI. By the mid-1980s, wiretaps recorded his every coded phrase. A lunch with salt meant a hit. A dog that needs walking meant a problem to be eliminated. Agents called him the most quotable mob boss of his era, because he spoke in euphemisms sharp enough to slice without explanation. And then, the cracks formed. His beloved nephew, Phil Leonetti, flipped. Associates turned state's witness. Scarfo's empire, once so tight, began to implode from the inside. But even as indictments mounted and prison walls closed in, Scarfo never softened. He carried his paranoia into the cell block, pacing barefoot at night with a Beretta tucked into his waistband, testing the locks, whispering names under his breath, like a priest reciting curses. The FBI would later call him a case study in pathological control, a man who could never stop building walls, even as the walls finally caged him. What made Scarfo terrifying wasn't just the blood he spilled, but the atmosphere he created. He turned Philadelphia into a city where men checked their mirrors twice, where laughter was measured, where silence itself was a weapon. Even decades after his death in 2017, men who once served him still lower their voices when his name comes up, Because Scarfo wasn't just a gangster. He was a climate, the pressure drop before a storm, the silence that means something terrible is about to happen. And that silence, more than the money, more than the bodies, more than the broken unions, is the ghost he left behind. Chapter 3. The betrayal of Blood Prison was supposed to be a pause for Scarfo, not an ending. In his mind, the cell walls were just another set of bricks to lean against while business continued outside. He had always believed that fear was portable, that it clung to his name like the smell of gunpowder, carrying across walls, fences, even steel doors. And for a time, he wasn't wrong. Even behind bars, he tried to run things the way he always had, coded letters through visitors, whispered orders disguised as family anecdotes, instructions hidden in recipes or crossword puzzles. His voice still carried weight in Philadelphia and Atlantic City. The problem was that fear, while powerful, is fragile when stretched too thin. For all his paranoia, Scarfo had made one critical mistake. He trusted his nephew, Phil Leonetti. Blood, he believed, was insurance against betrayal. Blood doesn't flip. Blood doesn't break. But blood has a breaking point. And Leonetti, who had been raised under Scarfo's wing, molded into his right hand, and taught to view silence as scripture, cracked under the relentless weight of indictments, offered leniency. Leonetti did what Scarfo never thought possible. He talked, and in doing so, he didn't just betray his uncle. He dismantled an empire. The irony of Leonetti's betrayal was that Scarfo had practically written the script himself. He'd spent years eliminating anyone who questioned him, silencing even loyal men at the faintest whiff of dissent. By the mid-1980s, Scarfo's inner circle wasn't strong. It was brittle. Men didn't stand by him out of loyalty. They stood out of fear, and fear collapses the second the balance shifts. Leonetti's testimony was devastating, not just because of what he revealed, the murders, the rackets, the extortion, but because of the precision with which he delivered it. He'd learned Scarfo's methods too well. Where other witnesses rambled or contradicted themselves, Leonetti spoke like his uncle. Calm, measured, terrifyingly certain. He explained what lunch with salt really meant. He confirmed who Scarfo had ordered killed and why. He broke down the entire architecture of Scarfo's coded paranoia for the FBI, and in doing so, turned Scarfo's greatest weapon, silence, into evidence. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a mirror held up to everything Scarfo had built, reflecting back not fear, but fragility. Scarfo's reaction, according to those who watched him in court, was chilling. He didn't rage. He didn't weep. He didn't even speak. He sat stone-faced, as his own blood carved him open with words. Some say his lack of reaction was strength. Others say it was shock. But one former associate, years later, put it differently. That was the only time I ever saw him look small, because for all the guns, all the contracts, all the corpses he left scattered across Philadelphia, nothing cut deeper than silence breaking inside his own family. And yet, even then, Scarfo refused to see it as a failure of his methods. In his mind, Leonetti hadn't betrayed him. The world had. The FBI had. The courts had. Loyalty, Scarfo insisted, wasn't dead. It had been corrupted, twisted by outsiders. To his last breath, he clung to that delusion that he had ruled rightly, and others had failed him. That was the tragedy of Scarfo. He had built a world so tight, so paranoid, so brittle, that no one could breathe in it, not even him. And when the cracks came, they weren't loud. They were quiet, like the click of a lock turning in a courtroom door. Chapter 4. The ghost in the concrete. Scarfo's empire collapsed faster than anyone thought possible. By 1989, the Philadelphia mob, once flush with casino cash and union muscle, was in tatters. His reign had been so bloody, so paranoid, that no one trusted anyone. Captains who had once ruled neighborhoods with quiet confidence now jumped at shadows, unsure who might be watching. Associates turned state's witness, not just to avoid prison, but to avoid Scarfo himself. The FBI, which had once struggled to infiltrate mob families, suddenly found itself with an abundance of informants, all of them eager to tell stories about the little man with the sharp suits and sharper temper. Scarfo had ruled like a storm, and when the storm ended, the ground was flooded with debris. The Philadelphia mob would never be the same again. But Scarfo's ghost didn't vanish. It seeped into the foundations of the very city he had once ruled. Contractors in Atlantic City whispered about him long after his imprisonment. Stories surfaced of buildings whose permits went through too quickly, of projects where Scarfo's name never appeared on paper but lingered in the background like a watermark. Old union reps, long since retired, still warned younger men, "Don't pull a Scarfo," a phrase that meant don't push too hard, don't bleed the well dry, don't forget that greed can eat itself alive. Even in courtrooms decades later, judges reference Scarfo as a cautionary tale, reminding defendants that brutality may control men for a season, but it collapses in the long run. His name had become less a person and more a parable, a shorthand for the corrosive power of paranoia. Inside prison walls, Scarfo remained Scarfo. He walked with the same stiff posture, sat with his back to walls, and refused to eat with utensils he hadn't inspected himself. Guards reported that he spoke less and less as he aged, muttering names under his breath like incantations, counting debts no one else remembered. He was transferred from one high-security facility to another, the Bureau of Prisons, constantly breaking up what influence he tried to maintain. Yet, even stripped of his empire, Scarfo remained unsettling. Inmates said he carried an aura, a silence so heavy it bent the air in a room. You didn't laugh near him. You didn't talk too loud. You just respected the gravity of a man who had once made an entire city hold its breath. And maybe that was his true legacy. Not the money, not the bodies, not even the betrayal of his nephew, but the silence, the way he could make men pause, hesitate, measure their words. That silence outlived him. It still lingers in Philadelphia and Atlantic City today. In old social clubs, where men look at the door twice before speaking. In construction sites, where superstitions run deeper than concrete. In the whispered phrase, "Don't pull a Scarfo." Scarfo died in 2017, at 87 years old, in federal custody. No headlines screamed, no crowds gathered, no black Cadillacs idled outside cemeteries. His death was quiet, bureaucratic, like a file being closed. But in truth, Scarfo had been dead long before. His empire, his family, his bloodline, all fractured. His legacy, however, remained, because some men build monuments, and some men build myths. Scarfo built neither. He built silence. And silence, unlike concrete, doesn't crack. It lingers. It waits. It breathes in rooms, long after the man who created it is gone. Chapter 5. The Last Silence. By the time the 2000s rolled around, Nicodemo Scarfo was no longer the tyrant who had terrified Atlantic City and Philadelphia. He was an old man, locked in the quiet machinery of federal prisons. His once razor-sharp paranoia dulled into routine. Yet, even in that decline, he remained unlike other aging mobsters who softened, cracked jokes with guards, or played cards in common rooms. Scarfo stayed rigid. Guards reported he never slouched in his chair, never left his bed unmade, never spoke without measuring the words first. He had lost his empire, but he hadn't lost the habits that built it. His life had become smaller, reduced to concrete walls, stainless steel trays, and the low hum of ventilation systems. And yet, within that shrinking world, his legend only grew. Younger inmates, too young to remember his bloody reign, whispered his name like campfire tales. That's the guy who made his whole family afraid to breathe. Some swore he still gave orders from his cell, hidden in coded letters. Others said he sat for hours, just staring at the wall, lips moving silently as if reciting the names of men he'd lost, or men he wished he had killed. Scarfo never confirmed either version. He didn't need to. His silence was the story. Outside, the world that had once bent to him had moved on. Atlantic City had become a corporate playground, its mobbed-up edges blunted by regulators, surveillance cameras, and tax audits. The Philadelphia mob, fractured and fragile, staggered through new leadership, never regaining the iron grip it once had. And yet, in the cracks of that new world, Scarfo's ghost persisted. Contractors still whispered about projects from the 1980s, where the concrete set too quickly, or where inspectors vanished after one meeting with the little man. Retired union men told their sons not to linger too long in parking lots, not because of new bosses, but because of the habits Scarfo had carved into their bones. Even FBI agents, long retired, admitted in interviews that Scarfo's paranoia had changed how law enforcement worked. He forced them to evolve, to listen closer, to decode whispers instead of chasing shouts. One agent put it best: Scarfo didn't just change the mob, he changed us. And yet for Scarfo himself, the real punishment wasn't the walls, or the bars, or the endless hum of prison fans. It was irrelevance. The world no longer feared him. His name, once spoken with caution, became just another entry in mob history books, squeezed between more flamboyant bosses like Gotti and more infamous ghosts like Capone. Scarfo hated being forgotten. He had built his entire empire on the pause before his name was spoken, the hesitation in men's throats. Now, even that was fading, and maybe that's why, in his final years, guards said he talked to himself more often, not rambling, not confused, just muttering names, names of men long dead, names of streets, names of diners. He was walking the old maps in his mind, pacing the city he once owned, making sure no one slipped out of his memory, because to Scarfo, forgetting was worse than death. Forgetting meant you had never mattered at all. Nicodemo Scarfo died quietly on January 13, 2017, in a federal medical center in North Carolina. No headlines, no crowd of black suits, no weeping soldiers swearing vengeance, just paperwork, a closed file, and silence. The man who had once ruled through fear, who had turned an entire city into a stage of paranoia, ended as just another inmate lost to time. And yet, in Philadelphia and Atlantic City, his shadow lingers, not in monuments, not in gravestones, but in habits, in the way old men still lock their doors twice at night, in the way conversations pause when certain names are mentioned, in the way fear, once planted, grows roots too deep to dig out. Scarfo's story isn't about wealth or glory or even blood. It's about silence, how one man weaponized it, turned it into currency, into armor, into the air that everyone around him breathed. And when that silence finally outlived him, it didn't fade, it stayed. You can still feel it if you walk the boardwalk at night, past the glowing casinos and the darkened alleys, that heaviness in the air, that sensation that someone is watching, measuring, waiting. Maybe it's just the ocean breeze. Maybe it's something older, something Scarfo left behind. So as you lay back now, with the hum of your own room soft around you, let the silence settle. Let it be gentle, not fearful. Let the story slip back into the shadows where it belongs. Because Scarfo's era is over, but the quiet he carried still teaches us something. Sometimes the loudest men vanish, but the whispers, they remain. And tonight, as your eyes grow heavy, that whisper is no longer his, it's yours. The hush of sleep, the quiet Scarfo could never find, drift into it now. Let the silence be peace, not fear.